Okay, so this is going to be this is going to be my homily, right? So this is going to be a little bit preachy. I think where we're at, 2026 is going to be a very special year. And I feel that we're in the event horizon. And what that means is we're kind of, all of us in this room, we're kind of stuck in the black hole. We've been talking about this, doing this for several years. And, just looking at a very brief timeline, I'm skipping over a lot of things, but the consortium was formed in 2020. And then right on the heels of that came COVID. So I think we had our first meeting and then we shut down for really, was it about a year and a half? It seems like it was yesterday. But during that time, we built the foundation for a lot of the documents, the NPDES Plus list, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. And then, how we're going to do sample transfer, what the lab is going to analyze, how they're going to analyze it, what the methods are. A lot of the foundational infrastructure was in those first couple of years. And really, 2024 was the big year for a lot of field pilots. So, we did one, TPLT did one, I think Eris did some, Bechtel. There was a bunch of these field pilots that happened in 2024. And 2025 was more spent in data reduction, putting the presentations together, folks going out and talking about what we did. And then I think 2026 really is going to be the year where we start to see this really be implemented. And I think Laura mentioned this morning that, you expect to see water put out into the environment this year. And I agree with you. So I think 2026, you're going to see some permits finalized. I think there's about 3 right now that TCEQ has issued draft permits. They're being negotiated on, and then they're going to be finalized. And then once they're finalized, we're ready to go. In fact, when we've talked about this in other areas, the public feedback that we've got is, why aren't you doing this now? So a couple of things I want to talk about here. Produced water, what it is and what it is not. I would say that produced water is, it's the boogeyman. It has been labeled as a uniquely toxic industrial byproduct. Initial efforts used to characterize produced water focused on an extremely broad analyte list. That was the NPDES Plus list. A lot of folks within NGL said, man, I'd love to find the guy who helped with this NPDES Plus list and wring his neck. I'm like, well, that was kind of us as an industry. I think we collectively said, what we need to do is we need to establish the broadest list possible. Look at all of the analytes that we can possibly pull from. And, for us, we looked at the Danforth list early on and worked with Tetra Tech, an engineering firm, to pull samples. And then from that, it just grew. And now, if you look at Texas's version versus New Mexico's version, they're a little bit different. Everybody has a slightly different version of what the NPDES Plus list is, but I think at this point it's over 500 constituents. What I would like to say is this has been misinterpreted. Originally, we assigned this list as very broad, to cast a broad net, to show that there isn't this stuff in here, but we're doing our due diligence. I've heard a lot of folks, including state regulators, say the NPDES Plus list is the list of things that is commonly found in oil and gas produced water. That is absolutely not the case. And, Mike has said it. I think you're going to hear from other people the same thing. But what we found was over 70% of all the analytes on the NPDES Plus list were non-detect in raw produced water. That's before it's gone through anything else. So of that 500 and some constituents, 70% of them have been non-detect in raw produced water. Now you put it through the most advanced treatment technology that's being deployed. Arguably, the direct potable reuse is very similar to this, but what you have coming out of that is a highly polished treated water. What we also found when we're looking at this, you have to compare it to other things. So anytime we took samples, we would compare it to the Pecos, we would compare it to Red Bluff Reservoir. And a lot of the things that, the really boogeyman things that people think that are in produced water, they're already in our surface water. And that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody in here. I mean, we've found, I used to work at Eurofins and we looked at PCB congeners. We found PCB congeners in snow in the Himalayas. We would take umbilical cord samples and analyze that for dioxin. I mean, this stuff is ubiquitous in the environment. It is not in water that's been geologically sequestered for millions of years. One of the other things that I've heard over and over and over again, and we have seen, is the primary drivers of toxicity in treated produced water are ammonia and boron. If you're using this for agriculture, the ammonia is great. The boron is not. If you're discharging this into a surface water, the ammonia has to be removed or it's going to deplete the oxygen. So one of the things that I hear, and I'm sure that everybody else in here does, is there are too many unknowns. To which I would say, look to our website. And as Zach has said, we need to do a better job in communicating this. But right now, the consortium has done an excellent job. There's 38 publications, peer-reviewed, that are on there, 37 presentations, podcasts. I mean, everybody has a podcast now. I want to see you on Joe Rogan. So that's my challenge to you, is you need to be on Joe Rogan. 4.7 hours of webinars. And then, we've supported multiple field pilots, and collectively there's been millions and millions of dollars in legally defensible testing that has supported the publications, the podcasts, the presentations. I mean, we've really done a lot of good work. So when I hear, man, there's just too many unknowns with this, really, you gotta, folks need to look at it. Folks need to read it. And, the regulators, they need to look at this stuff because it is out there. I would argue that we probably have to do a better job communicating it. The E&O, I think, is the single biggest area that we need to focus on because, effective communication, you have the transmitter and the receptor, you have the message, but if it's not making it to the receptor, it's not really effective communication. We're getting lost somewhere. The second thing that I hear is, well, but what about all the nasty unknown things that are in frac fluid? How can you design anything that treats all of that when it's all proprietary, when everything is bound in secret, and these are really nasty chemicals? So we took it upon ourselves to do a pretty comprehensive review from data from Frac Focus, and what we listed, these are the common constituents that we see in frac blends over and over and over again. And the ones with asterisks are also the ones that are in produced water and production chemistry. And that's been my message is look, I think that there is a myopic focus on flowback water to the exclusion of produced water, because every barrel of water that we get as a water midstream, there is production chemistry in there. In fact, we've seen that signal, specifically citric acid, other organic acids. We've seen that in the water. Again, from Frac Focus, we queried all of the wells in the region from where our pilot and then our permit is going to be. And with some assumptions, all of these, I think, were conservative assumptions. I tried to prove out, our hypothesis is that in a highly commingled water source, the majority of everything that you get is produced water, and then flowback water, it makes up a smaller amount of that. But nobody has really done that work. So we provided this data to TCEQ, and what we found was we looked at spud date. We assumed the average frac volume of water that was used. And then I think here, I assumed the first 90 days post flowback, all of that was considered flowback water. Then post 90 days, then that turns into produced water. And then we looked at all of the wells going forward. And what we found was that at any given time, roughly less than 10% of the water is flowback, and 90% of it is produced water. What does that mean? What that means is when you're worried about these unknown things that are in frac chemistry, really, when you volume correct for them, they're quite de minimis in the commingled water source. Now, that's for us. Every operation is going to be different. If you're trying to do this at an SWD that's taking trucked water, you very well might be getting a truck that is taking flowback water. That's going to be completely different. But for us, a highly commingled water, what you're going to see is that flowback is diluted with a lot of produced water. And at the end of the day, really on the bottom graph there, you're seeing the contribution from the production chemistry is actually a bigger concern than the frac chemical. And all of these things can be removed by our advanced treatment processes. So real quick, I've presented this before, but in 2024, we did a field pilot where we were taking our produced water, went through a full treatment train that consisted of LSSRO, so large salt rejection RO, to take it from 120,000 down to about 60,000, and then from 60 down to about less than 500 TDS through seawater RO. And then we did a field plot study where we irrigated 2 sections with a control water, which was Carlsbad drinking water, and then 2 sections with our treated produced water. We irrigated Sudan grass sorghum, and then Huma Tariq from CSU. She was a grad student under Thomas Borch. She presented on this in one of your webinars most recently, and she did all of the post work on this. I learned that I hate drip irrigation, and it's really finicky. So our future work is going to be using center pivots. But what she found was really there was no statistical differences on anything, with the exception of the amount of ammonia was higher in the treated produced water, which was a plus on this, and the amount of boron was higher. But crop yield, and then I think the other difference was there was more nitrogen-related bacteria in the produced water plots because of the ammonia. But everything else there was no statistical differences between the two. Why we did the permit was because we want to do this full scale. And Mike, one of the things I saw on your slides, you had the facilities. Our anticline facility wasn't on there, so that's just something to keep in mind. We did this in Pinedale, Wyoming. We had a 50,000 barrel a day treat to discharge facility into the Upper Green River, where we discharged into what was and still is a Class A trout stream, over 60 million barrels of produced water. So this isn't our first rodeo, but it certainly is at this volume. So we have 2 outfalls, proposed outfalls. One is going to be into Red Bluff Reservoir. One is going to be down into Salt Creek, which is a tributary into the Pecos. We received our draft permit in September, and we're working with TCEQ to get to a final. I don't want to steal anybody else's thunder, but there's a couple of other folks that have received it, and we're very hopeful that this is going to happen pretty soon. Our full volume is going to be 17 MGD, or over 400,000 barrels a day. So this is transformative to that region, and this is a picture of that region. You can see the Pecos River. It's dry for a lot of the year, and quite frankly, when it is flowing, the quality of that water is pretty bad. 14,000 TDS is what we found. In Red Bluff Reservoir, it was also pretty high. This was a list where we were looking at the NPDS Plus list. I truncated it for you. I just showed the top, but again, we're comparing the NPDS Plus list to the Pecos River near our facility, Striker 1. Somebody else, Sunvapor, is going to be talking a little bit later about a pilot that they're doing there. But one of the reasons that we chose that facility is it's pretty much at the bottom of the state, right next to the Pecos River. So for us, it's a strategic location. We have data comparability going all the way back to 2020 on the river and our produced water. And what we found was, again, in the fresh water, we did see things like 2378 TCDD, which is the most toxic organic constituent, 4,4-DDD, 4,4-DDT, endosulfan, gross alpha beta was there, but pretty low levels. NBS surfactants, which are an indicator of surfactants that are used in oil and gas. PFAS was ubiquitous everywhere in the surface. And none of these are the boogeymen type chemicals. None of these things, with the exception of the gross alpha beta, were found in the treated produced water. So I'm not saying that it's bad surface water, so it doesn't matter what we're treating to. What I'm saying is when we look at treated produced water, we have to look at it in the context of what the receiving water is going to be and what is the net effect. In this case, the net effect is going to be positive. We're going to make things better than they are today. Trying not to go long because the people before me pushed me back, but I'm going to wrap this up pretty quickly. What we see, the future of this, it's not just a treat to discharge. It's an overall portfolio where, today we have the pipelines, we have the surface facilities, we have the injection wells. You also have infilled recycle, right? Roughly 10% of all of our water. We handle 3 million barrels of water a day, which is an astronomically large amount of water. About 10% of that, 300,000 barrels of water a day, goes back to industry for recycle. We just want to build on that and make that bigger. A portion of that is going to go to the advanced treatment facility. Like I said, our full scale is going to be 400,000 barrels a day, which means that we're going to take about 800,000 barrels a day on the influent side. You're going to crack that down. Half of that volume is going to be fresh water. Half of that volume is going to be concentrated brine. At our headworks, we're designing for 1 million barrels of water a day. And then if we can send some of that to frac, great. That prohibits, that keeps us from having to send it through a higher CapEx and OpEx operation through the advanced treatment process. It goes back to the frac right from those impoundments. The fresh water can be sent back to industry for cement making, dust control, things like that, or discharged into the environment through either of our 2 outfalls. But the concentrated brine is going to be used for critical mineral recovery. We've been recovering lithium for over a year in the Permian Basin. It's tough, but it can be done, and we're doing it. In native water, that's only going to get more, the economics work better in the concentrated brine because everything's doubled. So this is kind of what we see, and I think that everybody else is going to be doing basically the same thing to make these economics work out. So in closing, the 2026 outlook, I said that these are things that we're going to see this year. The public comment period for at least 3 TCEQ discharge permits, that's going to happen. And what we're going to need during that public comment period is y'all's support for this, explaining why this is necessary. For the water action plans for new water, we're going to need that. And I suspect that some of this stuff is going to go towards hearings. So during those hearings, the publications, the 38 publications that y'all have on there, we're going to be using that. The Texas group, we'd like to use their work product to basically make our case, because quite frankly, we're the oil industry, and anything that we say is taken with a huge grain of salt from TCEQ or NMED or other folks. So it needs to come from non-partial people. The phase 1 discharge facilities will go live. So what we're seeing in Texas is they're going to say, look, we're not going to give you permission to do all 400,000 barrels a day all at once. You're going to have to earn that through 3 to 4 phases. You're going to have to operate at a smaller phase for 6 months successfully, and then you unlock the gate to the next one. I think that's prudent. So I fully expect that you're going to see phase 1 discharges into the PECA system this year in Texas. The third bullet, there's no way around this. New Mexico has to get serious about this, or they're going to lose all of this opportunity to Texas. And when you just compare and contrast what's going on in New Mexico versus what's going on in Texas, they amended their state constitution. They have Senate bills where we've identified that we need new sources of water. And oh, by the way, treated produced water is one of the specified new sources. They're trying to get money to these projects. Investment is going to go where there is a surety and where it's going to be treated well. And what that means is, you know, if you just move your operation south of the border, you have a completely different operating paradigm. That's what's going to happen. And I'd hate to see, I think, Laura, you also said that 38% of all the water right now is coming from New Mexico. That is going to get lost, and Texas is going to benefit from it. Also, Texas settled through their Supreme Court the ownership of produced water and the entrained minerals. I think some of that stuff, specifically the entrained minerals, is still up in the air in New Mexico. And you know, right now, before all of this stuff happens at large scale, now is the time for folks to go out and collect baseline samples of, you know, these systems, the rivers, the sediments, so we can compare and see as these projects start any impact or the lack thereof. And lastly, what I want to say, again, the education and outreach I see is the single biggest opportunity, the thing that we need to focus on most. We need to communicate the safety of treated produced water. We need to also, I think, really talk about the economics of oil and gas and really what that does to the folks of New Mexico, so they understand that this opportunity is in front of us. I mean, I saw a news story where Eric Schmidt from Google is working with certain folks to bring in data centers in Texas. I mean, that's as big of a transformational opportunity as it gets, and y'all are going to miss it. So we need to do a much better job of communicating that to folks, and you know, let's bring this to fruition. So thank you all, and 2 minutes late, so let's go have lunch.
Hold on, we need the mic so we can.
Dan Mueller, Environmental Defense Fund, and Ryan, great on work that y'all have been doing and transparency of all that. I did want to make one clarification point. The draft permit is in between you and TCEQ. There is no draft permit out for public review at this time.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah, once that gets finalized, then it will.
And you call it finalized, but there's a whole process, as you mentioned, to go through before a permit actually becomes final. Because the standpoint of being able for the public to look at this data is not, we won't have the opportunity until the draft permit is released for public review.
That's right.
Very good job, Ryan. Rick McCurdy with Select Water Solutions. How is TCEQ having you approach quality of water of the discharge? Are you having to meet what's the quality of the water at your outfall, or are you able to go in with a better quality water?
It's definitely got to be a better quality water.
John Christensen, Tetra Tech. I want to commend Ryan for personal. He's been a really good, positive leadership example, and trying to pursue this. I think he also feels like he's a pioneer. Everybody knows what happens to the pioneers. Most of them died by the side of the trail, right? So it's always not pleasant. But part of this is actually a rehash. The first Clean Water Act was 1972. Anybody remember the president? Richard Nixon. Oh my God. So in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we fought about how to test this and how clean is clean. Now we're doing it again. And so we have to remember the lessons. So the EPA really did a good thing. And at the time it was a real battle, but we came up with organism testing, what they call whole effluent testing. And the preamble, when it was put in the Federal Register, says, there are going to be compounds that are newly created. There will be compounds we will not know of. There will be, quote, unknowns. And so we will use this biological testing to make sure that the effluent is non-toxic. And so that's well defined, and that's our whole card. And so the first thing, for those of you who are not in industry, if you're sitting on the industry side and you're going to get a permit, that's a contract. if you get a permit, you must perform the contract. If you accept a permit and you can't, comply with the permit and perform that contract, it's not good for your career. So all the companies such as Ryan's basically went out and did their pilot, invested money, spent millions of dollars on chemistry, and then they also tested the effluent to make sure it would pass the wet test. And it will. So essentially, that's going to be our secret of getting the agencies to do that type of work to cover the unknown unknowns. And it's a very thorough process, and one that I think that the going forward research of the consortiums is to sort of emulate that wet testing process. We may not always know what the compound is that causes toxicity or inhibition, but it will produce a response in the test organisms. And that's our early warning system. And any company that has a test where maybe they passed the test, but the organisms were inhibited, first thing we do is figure out what the heck's going on. What's the cause of that?
In full disclosure, John is one of our consultants, and I fully expect him to bill me for those nice things that he said. But he's absolutely right. There is no perfect analyte list. There's differences between, like I said, between the New Mexico NPDES Plus list and the Texas NPDES Plus list. And wet testing is what gives you assurance that, maybe there aren't a couple of things on that list. More importantly, it is possible that you are just below the regulatory threshold for everything on that list. So from that standpoint, you're good to go, but there's going to be a synergistic effect that would be caught by wet testing. So as long as you're passing a wet testing, it doesn't really matter what the analyte list is.
Yes, thank you. Amanda Trujillo from ExxonMobil. I'm curious, boron's been mentioned a few times, and I was wondering if you had been doing any experiments with techniques to reduce the concentration of boron, and if you had an idea what kind of cost impact that would have to per barrel for the cleanups.
So that's an excellent question, and that's part of where we're at with the negotiation stage with the agencies is I don't have an answer for boron. I do for ammonia. So what we've seen for ammonia is, if you're south of 8 ppm, really there isn't any issues with wet testing. So a reasonable number in my mind would be, 5, maybe 3. It's like half the distance to the goal line. You never get there. You never get there, but every time that you go, you're increasing the CapEx and the OpEx of the removal technology. So if an agency comes back and says 3 ppm versus 0.3 ppm, that is, at that point, you're just adding CapEx and OpEx to chase something that really, I think if you're good at 3, it's overkill. And the biggest challenge to this is the economics. Like I said, we had a treat to discharge facility in Wyoming. It worked great. We shut it down and we inject all of that water because it was no longer economically viable. So to take it back to boron, it really depends on what the final goal is. And, then from there, we would take it back to our engineers and say, present us with ways that you can remove this, whether it's zeolites or ion exchange. And then, oh, by the way, you need to give us a performance guarantee. As long as we're giving you an influent out of our, let's say, our thermal process or our membrane process, if we can get boron down to 5, you need to take it from 5 down to whatever it is, 0.5. And then we're going to make the selection based off of what that final target is. And as of yet, we don't know what that final target is.
Wrap us up with one last question here. Ryan, on your third bullet point, that's kind of that spicy one with New Mexico, thinking about Laura's presentation earlier, where there's going to be billions of dollars that could be made from produced water treatment and reuse. If entities start putting produced water treatment facilities kind of at the border on the Texas side, there's a lot of money to be made there. But do you think there will also be this sucking sound that we hear in New Mexico where kind of conventional business from oil and gas also moves across the state line? Like, will it be a domino effect, or do you think a lot of the conventional business will kind of stay where it is and new growth will pop up from just the beneficial reuse?
I mean, I would argue that to a certain extent that it's already happened. When you look at where the produced water is going, there's no secret that it's going to Texas right now. So if it's going to be treated, it's going to be treated at the facilities that are already in Texas. I think you all kind of miss this current wave because that pipe facility that's already in the ground. You're going to have to focus on the next one.
So is that all getting piped over?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Again, it varies from location to location, but I know, for us and the other folks that have gotten draft permits, it is all piped water.
Okay. So there's not much trucking of produced water, right?
No. We're in the Permian Basin, we're under 1% of our total volume is trucked. It is all piped water. And what that means it is highly commingled, which is nice because if you're designing a process, you don't want a lot of swings.
Yeah.
The more commingled it is, the more even it's going to be over time.
Thank you.